Hello friend, welcome to all of you. This is online lecture number 9. In the previous lecture, we discussed on the amalgamation of banking company under section 44 and under section 45, which is the voluntary amalgamation and compulsory amalgamation throughout the RBI and throughout the government. Today we are looking the another point, which is the Bank Regulation Act applicable to cooperative bank in 1965. So today we discuss the another point under the Bank Regulation Act 1949. Before you know the our background of Bank Regulation Act 1949, this act exists in 1949 and came into the force from the 16 March 1949, and it is applicable to Jammu and Kashmir 1956, and it is the applicable to cooperative bank from the 1965, and this is the our topic of today's lecture, the application of the Bank Regulation Act to cooperative banks. So this is the our topic. So some of the sections which is the important in this lecture, we see the application of the Bank Regulation Act 1965 and application this act to cooperative bank. So 1965 amendment in the Bank Regulation Act, and this law is applicable to cooperative bank. So the act was exist in 1949, but some amendment is made in 1965, and before that this act is not applicable to cooperative banks. But after the wide spread of the cooperative banks network, the government thinking that the Bank Regulation Act is applicable to cooperative banks and cover these wide range of banking into the under the Bank Regulation Act. And to control of this cooperative banking, the amendment is made, and the Bank Regulation Act is applicable to cooperative bank from 1965. So Bank Regulation Act is applicable to cooperative bank from 1965. This act has been some changes, modification, and made applicable to cooperative societies and carrying the business in banking. So amending the Act 23 of 1965 came into the force 1st March 1966. So the Bank Regulation Act is the applicable to cooperative bank from 1965 amendment, but came into the force from the 1st March 1966 and change the name of this act. The main provision of the act are applicable to cooperative banks and the cooperative societies. So Bank Regulation Act as applicable to cooperative banks is exist 1965 and came into force in 1st March 1966. So some of the provision which is the earlier mentioned in the Bank Regulation Act, these are the provision also continue to cooperative banks, but some of the provision is new for the cooperative banks. So RBI is the applicable the Bank Regulation Act to the cooperative banks. So this act is the applicable to cooperative banks is also. So cooperative banks is also under the regulation of the Reserve Bank of India from this act. Amendment of the Bank Regulation Act 1965, and so under the cooperative banks is control of RBI. So amendment 1965 is what is the deal. The amending the act has added a new part, chapter 5th, which is the consist of the section 56 and section 22 of the original Banking Regulation Act as a modified, and sanction 56 has been made applicable to cooperative banks. So original act is the B.R.Act Bank Regulation Act 1949, and the section 56 is mentioned into the original act and exists after that this act section to the cooperative banks. So section 56 is applicable to the cooperative banks from the 1965. So this special section made for the Bank Regulation Act and cooperative bank not under this act. But after This Act Amendment 1965, the cooperative banks they work under the Reserve Bank of India, and whether it is the primary cooperative society or the cooperative bank, it is the under the cover of Bank Regulation Act and the Section 56 or Amendment 1965. So limitation for the cooperative banks: a primary credit society which does the business of the banking, but it is paid a share capital and reserve value is less than 1 lakh, then such primary credit society does not require a license from the reserve banks. So primary cooperative societies is their paid up capital is less than 1 lakh. These societies not is the take permission from necessary to take a permission from RBI or not necessary to licensing from the RBI. All the cooperative banks with their paid up capital shares and reserve value more than the rupees 1 lakhs are required to take a license from the reserve banks. So whether it is the cooperative society or the cooperative banks, they need to permission from the RBI for their banking business license. The state and the central cooperative banks are required to hold the license and whether may be value of paid up capital and the reserves. So this law is applicable to this bank. After the amendment of this Act 1965, some of the they need to their acquire of the paid up capital of minimum percentage and subscribed capitals. So at least 50% of their the issue capital mean less than the 50% of their authorized capital. So 50% of that subscribed capital is necessary for their banking business, which is decided by the Reserve Bank of India. But under Section 70 is related to the reserve funds is not applicable to these banks. And reserve fund is created by these banks, but not all section is applicable. The definition of cooperative banks under this Bank Regulation Act: any cooperative society under business has used the word of bank or banker or banking as a part of its name, and the society not conducting the banking business cannot be used of the above word as a part of its name. So any cooperative society not use the word of bank, banker and banking, but which is the use the word of bank, cooperative banker and cooperative banking. This is the undercover of the Bank Regulation Act 1949 and Bank Regulation Amendment 1965, which is applicable to cooperative bank. So here the cooperative banks word means the include cooperative society, cooperative banks, state cooperative banks also. So under the definition of this law, the cooperative banks means the cooperative society also, the cooperative bank also and state cooperative bank also mentioned in this definition. So cooperative banks means the all these three types of the banks. Provision of licensing: the cooperative society or bank desiring the license under Section 22. The original Bank Regulation Act Section 22 is also about the bank licensing, and this is also applicable to the cooperative banks. So every cooperative bank take license from the RBI under the Section 22 as applicable to the principal office of the RBI, as per the Act of the Primary Credit Society undertaking business having paid up capital and reserve value less than the 1 lakh need not require. So where the primary cooperative society, which is the paid up capital is less than 1 lakh, they need not the permission from licensing from the RBI. But amendment is made in 2007 also required to get license permission from the RBI without any relaxation. So before of 2007 there is a relaxation to cooperative society which is the paid up capital less than would not need to take permission of the RBI. But after 2007 amendment, the primary cooperative society is also need to permission take from the RBI whether it is the paid up capital is less than 1 lakh or more than 1 lakh. Also, opening of business at new places and changing of location, it need the required permission of the RBI, which is the original Act B.R.Act 1949 Section 23. So Section 23 is applicable to nationalized banks and Section 23 is also applicable to corporate bank. So when the cooperative banks is want to opening new branches or to change the business location or place, they need the proper permission from the RBI under Section 23 and 22. Provision regarding the cash reserve. So Section 18 is the original act is about the cash reserve and provision of cash reserve, which is the modified and relation of the cooperative banks by Section 18 is applicable. So under Section 18 is the modified after the 1965 amendment and it is applicable to cooperative banks. So RBI has matter to security expected that the bank has to maintain cash reserves. So every bank is maintained a certain percent of the cash reserve for the gaining of the customers' truthfulness or the confidence and the completing their daily needs. So RBI matter to security expected that every banking company maintain the certain percent of the cash reserve. So cash reserve Section 18, the Bank Regulation Act 1949 is also applicable in the Bank Regulation Act 1965 application to cooperative banks. So Section 18 is a similar, which is the similar in original Act Bank Regulation Act 1949. Maintaining the asset, maintaining the liquid asset. In respect of the maintaining the asset of the cooperative banks, the subsection 1, subsection 2, 2A are applicable to cooperative banks. It regarding the maintained by the bank's balance by the cooperative current account with the RBI. So liquid asset, maintaining the liquid asset every cooperative bank into the RBI account. So every banking company is should maintain at least 20% of total deposit liability in form of cash, gold or securities, maintaining liquidity. So bank to over trading with the liquid cash is the available. So liquid cash is the available for the need of their customers. They maintain the 20% of liquid asset into the RBI account in the form of the gold, in form of the cash. So maintaining the liquid asset is applicable to cooperative banks but into the RBI account. The restriction on holding the shares. So this section 19 is referred to the restriction of holding shares cooperative banks. It provides further that in case of shares held by the cooperative banks are more, cooperative banks without delay report the matter of the Reserve Bank. The restriction to holding shares. So this section 19 is given restriction to cooperative banks holding the shares of the other banks and others. Restrictions on loans and advances under section 20. So no cooperative banks shall sanction any loans and advances or security of its own shares. So against of their own shares, they not sanction loan for their customers. To granting unsecured loans and advances to any directors and interest of the partner or managing agent of the guarantor. Many of the cooperative banks is the fail to running their businesses. The bank corruption increased, particularly about the cooperative banks. That's why this section 20 is imposed on the cooperative banks, restrictions on their loans and advances. So not the sanction loans on the basis of their shares, own shares, and not sanction the loans for the directives, partners of the directors or the any managing agent or guarantor. So before the sanctioning loan, they need a proper permission from the RBI. So restriction for their loans and advances and restriction to holding the shares of other banks and other companies. So there is restrictions mentioned in section 19 and section 20 to cooperative banks. Provision of winding of banking company. The winding of banking company means the closing of banking company. The part 3, the containing the provision for speedily disposal of winding up the proceeding to banking companies. So close down of banking company, closing the banking business means the winding up of banking company. This is also mentioned in the part 3 about the winding up of the cooperative banking company. Provision related to management. The section 10A is also mentioned in Original Act 1949, which is also continuing to the Bank Regulation Act application to Cooperative Bank 1965. The 10A is related to consultation of the Board of Directors. Section 10B is relating to appointment of the whole time agent and the whole time chairman. The section 10BB is about the powers of RBI, appoint of the chairman of the banking company, but 10C and 10D are not applicable to cooperative bank, which is the mentioned in Original Act 1949 Act, and which is applicable to nationalized bank. So 10A, 10B, 10BB, this section is applicable to cooperative bank about their management, but section 10C and 10D is not applicable to cooperative banks. So here is the brief summary what we learned from this lecture. The other provision of the annual account, balance sheet and profit and loss account by cooperative banks are the same than the relating to other companies, section 29. So preparation of balance sheet of banking companies, the audit of the banking company under section 29 and 30 is also applicable to cooperative banks. The section 22 for the licensing of banking companies, section 23 for the change the business place or the opening of new branch, section 23 is applicable to these banks. The reserve fund, cash reserve, liquid asset and the better capital, this section is also applicable to cooperative bank. Thus the RBI make no discriminate while laying down the number of restriction on the operating commercial bank as well as cooperative bank. So there is no more discrimination between the cooperative bank and the commercial banks. So some of the restrictions is the applicable to commercial bank, and similar kind of restrictions are applicable to cooperative banks. But about the liquid asset and cash reserve, the sum of the concession given by the RBI to these cooperative banks, because their better capital is the less and less soundness of the economic condition of these cooperative banks. With the wide spread of the banking and its wide range of the functions, it has become necessary to regulate the activities of banks. So widely spread of these banks, cooperative banks in overall the India. That's why the Bank Regulation Act is the mention and cover the cooperative banks on the 1965. The bank really played a vital role to industrialization, balanced development of the economy. So increasing use of capital, ability of the capital becomes important, and that purpose the development we need the money supply, and money supply plays the significant role in the economy. That's why the most of the important the central bank is the import or regulate the activity of commercial bank, other banks, and use the various regulatory act. So Bank Regulation Act is the purpose that the provide the money supply to development purpose of the economy, and also same time we need to control of this money supply in the economy to control on the commercial bank, the control on the foreign bank, control on the cooperative banks. That's why the purpose of the made of this Bank Regulation Act 1949. So references for this topic: the Mukul Mahajan book, Nirali publication, Sangre and Sarve, the Success publication. You can refer for this topic. The assignment question will be asked in the examination for 15 marks. The answer in detail, the answer in 500 words. The question will be asked. So explain in detail the provision of B.R.Act 1965 applicable to cooperative banks. Also, we are also looking at some question paper 2016, 17 and 19. That time we see that this question is the mention in this term and question paper, and also into the annual question paper. Explain in detail the provision of B.R.Act 1965 applicability to cooperative banks. So here is the complete of the ninth number of lecture. Thank you for watching this video. The next time, in the last lecture, we looking the winding of banking company, means the closing of banking company, and some of the question